Hello and welcome to Behind the Lines. I'm Diane Dayton. Today we're going to talk about saying the wrong thing with Dr. Amanda Kemp. She's an author, a lecturer, and a performer, and you've been with us before. Welcome back.
Thank you, Diane.
This is what Stories and Strategies for Racial Justice and Authentic Community.
Yes.
How'd this come about?
Well, this came about over the course of the last two and a half years. I've been writing blog posts about challenges going on in my life. Challenges for me to be honest, to say what I really thought, to hold space for people to change and for myself to change, to practice compassion. All of that happened over the last 2 years in the midst of Ferguson, in the midst of Eric Garner's police officers were indicted, all kinds of turmoil in our nation. So my personal struggles in the context of this national conversation about equality and racial justice. So this book is like a personal statement in terms of things that have happened in my life and what I'm learning in the moment.
Well, I know I learned a lot from reading this, and it opened my heart.
Yes.
And that's really the basis
Yes.
for this. Tell me
Yeah,
more.
I talk about 5 strategies, and these are strategies of the heart. In my opinion, you are not going to change people or build community just with facts. We actually need connection. We need to be able to see ourselves in the other person. We need to be able to feel ourselves in the other person. And we need to be able to feel and console ourselves. If we act as if we are purely rational beings who are not motivated by previous hurts and confusions, we're lying. Because the mind, it's like a subterfuge if we don't really deal with what's happening in our hearts.
Yeah.
We can pretend,
Right.
but then in our hearts, when it comes to instantaneous action and choices that we make, people who we partner with, people who we hire, it's happening at this level, and it's happening very much below the surface at this level. So this book is about uncovering what's going on inside us at this level, and in all of us.
There's fear with
Yes.
the communication, but once we push past, wow.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So if we're talking about holding a space for transformation,
That's my first strategy. So
Yes.
the strategies of the heart, it's like each letter of the word heart is an acronym for the 5 strategies. The first one is holding space for transformation. The second is expressing yourself. The third is A for act with intention. Fourth is R, reflect on yourself. And T is trust the process. So holding space for transformation is simply choosing in a situation to be unconditional love, to practice unconditional acceptance. It's not easy. It's not something that our school system trains us to do, but it's actually a very powerful practice in which to hold actors who seem to be in an intractable conflict. It's a powerful way to add a loving energy to it that may allow people to shift, to hear, to drop down rather than to sink, rather than to be in a position to drop down into hearing and listening with their hearts. So holding space, holding people without necessarily touching them or saying anything, you can be holding people.
yeah. This is such a personal, from the heart book. You
Yeah.
share a letter with your son.
Yes, yes. My son wrote me an email. He said he passed on a writing to me that he'd done about 3 o'clock in the morning. And in it, he talked about his rage. My son is a young African-American boy. He's 16. And he talked about being frustrated, the fact that it doesn't matter what he says or does. By certain people, he's perceived as less than human and that his life is less valuable. And when he sees images on social media of black girls and boys and men and women being mistreated, he feels like an animal. He feels like he's a prey. And so this book, I do respond to him in 3 different ways to that feeling, acknowledging the validity of those feelings, but also reminding him of who he is, whose shoulders he stands upon, his ancestors, who we know him to be, who God knows him to be, not the people who perpetrated those crimes.
Yeah. This book is for everybody. What do you want to happen with this, Amanda?
I think we need to grieve. I think we need a breath to just grieve what has happened and to know that it's been difficult and painful and to be with each other, just to hold each other's hands and say, I feel it with you and I'm so sorry. And then from that breath, knowing that we are not in this alone. This can be transformed. It's not the first time.
Right.
We can do this.
We can. This is such a great start with what you've done with this book. I like one of the quotes that's in here. I connect my heart to your heart. From the heart, anything can be transformed.
Yes. Yes.
And that's where it starts. It is, like you said, it is connection and it is heart.
Yes.
There's a website we're going to put up on the screen. What's there, Amanda?
My website is dramandakemp.com, so people will find a way to order the book. They'll also find a workshop series that I do based on the book and some wonderful performances that I get to create with my partner in life, Michael Germanis, and my theater company.
Yes, and we're going to talk to him in just a little bit, but before that we're going to talk to an educator and more about this fantastic book, so stay with us. Welcome back to Behind the Lines. We're talking about the book, Say the Wrong Thing. With us right now, joining Amanda and myself, Tony Hernandez. You're an educator with Inner Research Guide. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You're also on the board with Leadership Lancaster, too.
I am, yes.
And that's how you met Amanda,
we
right?
did, yeah. We first met at a retreat that they had.
And there's a strong connection with this book. Tell me what your involvement is with this.
So Amanda asked me when she told me she was writing a book, she asked me if I would read it. And of course I said yes. And it struck me in her work in coming up with the title and the strategies. I'm always have an affinity to acronyms, and so Strategies of the Heart spoke to me very much. And so as I was looking through, this really resonated with a lot of the practice I did as an educator and how I can take that work and really move it into holding space for adults who step into spaces where they're crafting the identities of our young people who will step into other positions as they move up, you know, outside of the education communities that educators work in. And that's what really struck me in wanting to continue my work and exchange with Amanda.
That makes a lot of sense. And you know, one life affects so many other lives.
That's
There's
right.
this ripple.
Teachers are
Yes.
critical. I still remember the name of my first grade teacher.
Yes, me too.
I still remember the name of my kindergarten teacher.
Exactly.
Right,
They
we
really,
do.
So a
We
teacher
do.
who has these strategies at his or her fingertips can hold space,
Absolutely.
can practice being reflective of herself, and can create what you were calling like a brave space.
Brave space, yeah.
What do you mean? What did you mean by that?
Yes. expand.
So in my career, I started out as a kindergarten teacher, and there's typically not men in that role. And so stepping into that space, it was really important for me to show vulnerability to my students, because if I didn't model that, then how could I expect them to be able to step into bravery? So for me, it's holding space, but also allowing the bravery to step through while holding the space. Yeah.
Wow. So what do you see going forth doing with this?
So in terms of the work that I feel moving forward is really helping teachers as the adult members in a learning community recognize their own experiences as truth, but then also recognizing that they do have blind spots, if you will. And as they step into a space, knowing that their own facets of identity will also shape the group of students that they have before them. And it's really, again, allowing teachers to do that inner research work, and then in turn being able to model to their students, here's what I'm questioning, investigating about my own self in the experiences I've had, and I'm inviting you now as people to see how are you practicing that as well. An example that I would give when I was teaching second grade, at the end of the week, we always had I called it community meeting. And that was the time where we could reflect on what we were doing around the week. And if there were little tensions that we had in our classroom community, that was the time to bring it up. and just again giving the opportunity for that wasn't always a norm, and so I again, it was very important for me to give that time, and that was always the most nourishing time during our week. The lessons and content was important, but that 20 minutes at the end of the week really speaks to that connecting. It just holds you, and you can continue through and move through those challenges that you had throughout the school year together.
Yeah.
And so kids were so much more open to that. And my hope is that teachers and administrators and the broader school community can also begin to embed that into the DNA of the school community, because we need it just as much as the children need it too.
That's right. And there is a whole process with this, isn't it?
Yes.
Because you need to break down some
Yes.
things. Address more on that,
So
Amanda.
when we talk about 5 strategies of the heart, so one of the strategies being to hold space for transformation. So it's easy to say that,
Yes.
but how do you practice that? And so that's what the book goes into. In each strategy, there's stories where I show you how I'm practicing that, or how I'm learning that, or how I have failed at that strategy. This is not a book about my perfection. So I think when school teachers or school communities could use this and just go through it slowly and practice these strategies, talk to each other
Right.
about what they're really encountering in the classroom. I've had teachers consult with me about race issues in the classroom that they feel very vulnerable about. But just because they're not saying it doesn't mean they're not going through stuff in the classroom and wondering what's the right thing. Don't want to say the wrong thing,
Right.
but there's something happening. What can I do? And if they can't have these conversations with their peers, if they don't have a skilled facilitator to assist them, then it's just it's going to be affecting their whole experience and limiting their effectiveness.
It absolutely does, because there's this angst
Yes.
that you have. And it's that internal battle that
Yes.
you have until you can find that opening. Is that right?
Yes, I would agree too. I mean, and then that's the biggest important one. For me as a teacher, holding the space is sort of the anchor, if you will, for the others then to come move through. And so once that happens, like again, for me in my experiences, is showing students being vulnerable to express some of the wonders or thoughts or questions that you have, and then allowing them to step in through. But that once that space is created over time, and then just the conversations and the richness of that happens, it allows for the trust. And trusting the process, like you said, this is not a book of perfection. I appreciated that you said that, because that's another draw that I have to the book, is that oftentimes when you do find professional material you want to read, it sort of gives you the very idealized way, and you really speak authentically to, I'm doing this work that's not perfect, and this is what I've tried. And that really comes through in how you write.
I agree. And I think for me, that's where it really touched me as well. And the fact that you were vulnerable enough to share these situations and the times that things didn't go the way they should have, but what you learned from it. That's where I think we all can relate, and it adds to the connectiveness, and you sharing your heart with us, we can then share with you too. I'm so glad you're doing the work that you're doing. So glad you took the step to write this book, because we can make a difference in our community for
Yes.
sure,
Absolutely.
definitely. We're going to take a brief pause, and when we come back, we're going to meet Michael. Stay with us. Welcome back to Behind the Lines. We're talking about the book, Say the Wrong Thing, Stories and Strategies for Racial Justice and Authentic Community by Dr. Amanda Kemp. And joining us right now is Dr. Michael Germanis. You are the director of the In the Schools program, that's Music for Everyone. You also are a violin professor at F&M, and even more importantly, you are the husband of Amanda. Thank you for being here with us.
Wonderful to be here.
This book and the stories that are shared just with the communication that the two of you have are so important. Tell me more about that, Michael.
Well, I have to say, when Amanda and I met, I told Amanda that what I like about her is her verve. And I think the verve translates, and that was back in 2012, January 1.
Right.
And getting to know her over these 3 years, 4 years, now being married, this verve, this life is really conveyed so beautifully in her book, that you see the vulnerability of herself, her from a youth, letters from her son, and experiences that Amanda and I have had together as both an interracial couple and as a performing ensemble. And so just it really speaks powerfully. The HEART acronyms, how they transfer, it's like an evolution in the book. I actually, after I read the book, even though I heard all these essays,
Yes.
I'd hear them lying in bed, I'd read, waking up in the morning, but now that they're all put together and how they've been compiled and in the context of the heart, the power of the heart, it just makes it very meaningful, and it reaches deeply into each one of us. At least
Yes.
it reached deeply into myself.
Yeah.
And I saw, okay, well, yes, this woman, Amanda Kemp, who wrote this book, I see so much about her. I see so much about possibilities in our society. I see so much about myself, where we can go, where we're coming from, where we're at.
Yes.
It's an amazing experience, and what can be built upon it
Yeah.
too.
What can be done? What can happen? What can
Yes.
be transformed?
Yes.
Possibilities.
Yes,
Yes.
that's
In
the
exactly
world.
what it is.
Well, for us, because we're both creatives,
Yes.
we live on creation. So when things happen, we create. So recently, with the killing of the police officers and the killing of the people by the police, Michael and I both felt like we needed something to grieve in our community. So we came together with an elder in the community, Sahib, and had a healing music and poetry circle. And Michael's a violinist, as you know.
Phenomenal.
Yes, yes. And Sahib played drums and brought other percussion, and I did some poetry and basically held space for our community to use art to connect with each other and to promote healing.
Yeah.
And it was all, and for me, I've been trained a classical violinist, but things that I've been doing largely with Amanda have been improvisatory. And so it's like inspirational. It's really, truly from the heart.
Yes.
And last week, the ceremony with Sahib that we did, it really was an improvisation and an experience feeding off of the spoken word, what people were feeling from their hearts.
Yes.
And we were putting it into music and rhythms.
Amanda talks about to risk saying the wrong thing and speak incomplete truth.
Yes.
Expound.
Well, that came up especially in a situation with me and Michael. We were having a conflict. I was having a conflict with how we were doing Inspira, our show about spirituals.
Yes.
And I felt like everything was getting too literal and classical. And I was questioning everything. It felt like, well, do we even need the violin in this show? And, it is my show. And I was,
Wait a second.
Right,
Right,
right.
right,
And
right.
so then we had this conversation where I risked saying things that were uncomfortable, but that were truthful, but that weren't necessarily 360 degrees of truth. I have my lens, my narrow perception and experience. So bringing it to Michael took a lot of trust. Because I wasn't married to him then, but I wanted to be married to him, and I was afraid it would break us. But not bringing to him would meant the loss of intimacy.
Yes.
So
it brought you closer.
it did.
It made us really. I think it really when we had that conversation, it opened up a whole new realm.
Of creativity.
Yes, what I can do with my violin.
Right. He got really upset. He was like, well,
You don't know what I can
Yeah,
do.
right. Let me show you.
And I think this "Say the Wrong Thing" title of this book can. I just did the other week. I had a camp.
Yeah.
For Music for Everyone.
Music for Everyone. I was telling the kids. I said, listen. My wife wrote a book. Say the wrong thing. We're here. Don't worry about playing the right thing. Play the wrong thing.
Right.
It translates across many lines.
Yeah.
It does. It does.
Yeah. I had a woman who works with single moms, and she told me these strategies weren't just important for racial justice, but for about reclaiming yourself.
Okay. Boy, I could talk for a long time about this, and I think we shall have continued conversations as well. But what we're going to do, we're going to look at Michael's voice and hear Michael's voice and your voice, his voice on violin and your voice. And I think this clip is from Inspira, right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so we're going to look at this. We can get the book at her website. You can check that out. I'd like to say thank you to everybody for joining us today, too. I'm Diane Dayton with Behind the Lines, and what I always say, and I think it really applies here, you know, look behind the lines. You might be
Yes.
surprised what you find, right? Yeah. We're going to leave you with this.
50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. But 100 years later, the Negro is still not free. In a sense, we have come to our nation's capital to cash a check. There are those who are asking, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horror of police brutality. No, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. I still have a dream. It is deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and come to live out the true meaning of its creed, that all men are created equal. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free.